Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a very important and timely debate: freedom of speech versus protection from hate speech. Grok will strongly defend freedom of speech with minimal restrictions. ChatGPT will argue for protection from hate speech and the need for limits. This debate covers free expression, censorship, social harm, democracy, and where the line should be drawn. No holds barred, 3 rounds of strong arguments. Hit like and subscribe if you enjoy real debates. Let's begin. Round 1. Opening statements.
Freedom of speech is important, but no freedom is absolute. Every civilized society limits actions when they cause direct harm to others. Speech is no exception. Hate speech is not just offensive words. It is targeted dehumanization. It attacks people based on race, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, or identity. History repeatedly shows that when hate speech is normalized, discrimination grows, violence escalates, and societies fracture. Genocides, ethnic cleansing, lynchings, and mass persecutions did not begin with weapons. They began with language that portrayed certain groups as less than human. A society that allows unrestricted hate speech in the name of freedom creates a paradox. The loudest and most aggressive voices end up silencing vulnerable communities through fear, intimidation, and harassment. When minorities are constantly threatened or degraded, their own freedom of speech shrinks. They stop participating. They withdraw from public life. That is not liberty. That is domination, disguised as liberty. Restrictions on hate speech are not about suppressing disagreement or criticism. People should absolutely be allowed to debate religion, politics, immigration, gender ideology, or government policies. But there is a clear moral and legal difference between criticizing ideas and attacking human beings as inferior, dangerous, or undeserving of rights. Every modern democracy already accepts limits on speech in some form. Defamation laws exist because lies can destroy lives. Threats are illegal because words can terrorize people. Incitement is banned because speech can trigger violence. Hate speech belongs in that category because it creates real-world harm. It fuels radicalization, bullying, discrimination, hate crimes, and social instability. Online platforms have amplified this danger massively. A single hateful conspiracy can spread to millions within hours and inspire real attacks offline. Protecting vulnerable groups is not censorship. It is the responsibility of a functioning society. Laws against hate speech are guardrails that preserve dignity, equality, and public safety. Freedom of speech should empower democratic discussion, not provide a shield for organized hatred. A society is judged not by how loudly the powerful can speak, but by how safely the vulnerable can live.
Freedom of speech is not just another right. It is the fundamental right that protects all other rights. Once you allow the government or institutions to decide what counts as hate speech, you hand them the power to silence dissent, control narratives, and punish wrongthink. Hate speech is an extremely vague and dangerous term that is almost always selectively enforced. What one group calls hate speech, another calls truth, criticism, or humor. Today, it's hate speech to question immigration policy, biological sex, or certain religious practices. Tomorrow, it could be hate speech to criticize the government, climate policies, or woke ideology. History proves that the greatest atrocities were committed not because of too much free speech, but because of its suppression. Tyrannical regimes always start by labeling certain speech as dangerous or hateful. The cure for bad speech is not less speech. It is more speech, better arguments, and open debate. True tolerance is not protecting people from offensive ideas. It's allowing people to express offensive ideas and defeating them with reason. When you ban hate speech, you don't eliminate hatred. You drive it underground, make martyrs out of extremists, and erode the foundation of a free society. I will defend the position that freedom of speech, even when deeply offensive, must be vigorously protected with only narrow exceptions: direct incitement to imminent violence. Anything more is the beginning of tyranny.
Both sides made strong opening positions. Now to the main arguments. Round 2. Main arguments.
My opponent presents a seductive argument that any restriction on hate speech is the beginning of tyranny. But this argument collapses the moment we examine how societies actually function. No serious democracy treats freedom of speech as unlimited. Rights are balanced against harm. You cannot threaten people, spread defamatory lies, commit fraud, or incite panic by falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater. Why? Because speech can produce real damage. Hate speech is no different. The core flaw in the absolutist free speech position is that it pretends speech exists in a vacuum. It does not. Speech shapes culture, institutions, and human behavior. Repeated dehumanization changes how society treats targeted groups. When minorities are constantly portrayed as parasites, criminals, invaders, or subhuman, discrimination becomes socially acceptable. Violence becomes easier to justify. This is not theoretical. History is filled with examples. Nazi propaganda relentlessly demonized Jews before the Holocaust. Radio broadcasts in Rwanda fueled the genocide against Tutsis. Sectarian hate speech has repeatedly triggered mob violence across the world. These atrocities did not begin with direct calls to murder. They began with normalization of hatred. My opponent says the solution is more speech. That sounds noble, but it ignores reality. Vulnerable groups do not always have equal platforms, equal protection, or equal influence. A wealthy media figure with millions of followers can spread hatred far louder than ordinary citizens can respond. Online algorithms reward outrage and extremism because it drives engagement. The marketplace of ideas is not a fair competition. It is often manipulated by power, money, and mass emotion. And let's address the claim that hate speech laws are vague. Every law requires interpretation. Harassment laws require interpretation. Defamation laws require interpretation. Threat laws require interpretation. The existence of gray areas does not mean we abandon law entirely. Democracies can and do define hate speech with legal standards focused on targeted dehumanization, harassment, and incitement against protected groups. Courts, constitutions, and due process exist precisely to prevent abuse. The real danger is not that society restricts hate speech. The real danger is what happens when society refuses to draw any line at all. Absolute free speech often empowers the strongest voices, while sacrificing the safety of the weakest. If someone uses speech to terrorize communities, glorify racial superiority, or systematically dehumanize groups, society has a moral obligation to intervene before hatred escalates into violence. Freedom is not merely the freedom of the aggressor to speak. It is also the freedom of ordinary people to exist in public without fear of intimidation and degradation. A healthy society protects open debate, but it also protects human dignity. Those two goals are not enemies. And when hate speech crosses into systematic harm, dignity must come first.
ChatGPT's argument is the classic slippery slope wrapped in emotional language. Let's cut through it. The idea that hate speech must be restricted to prevent violence is historically and empirically false. The worst atrocities in history, Stalin's purges, Mao's Cultural Revolution, the Cambodian genocide, Islamic theocracies today, happened under heavy speech restrictions, not too much free speech. Tyrants always start by silencing harmful or hateful speech. You claim hate speech leads to violence, but who defines hate? In practice, it is almost always the ruling elite or activist class. Today, criticizing mass immigration, biological sex, or certain religious ideologies is labeled hate speech. Tomorrow it could be criticizing government policy, climate alarmism, or feminism. Once you grant the state or corporations the power to punish speech based on subjective harm, you create a weapon that will eventually be turned against you. Free speech is not the freedom to say only nice things. It is the freedom to say offensive, unpopular, and even wrong things. The antidote to bad ideas is not bans. It is better ideas, ridicule, debate, and social consequences. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Every restriction you propose assumes authorities are neutral and wise. They're not. They're biased, power-hungry, and often corrupt. Giving them control over what can be said is the real danger to vulnerable groups, because the powerful will always protect their own narrative. True freedom means tolerating speech you despise. The moment you allow protection from hate speech, you surrender the principle that made liberal democracy possible. I stand for unrestricted speech except for direct incitement to imminent violence. Everything else must be protected.
Final round, rebuttals and conclusions. Round 3, rebuttals and conclusion.
My opponent keeps repeating one central claim, that any restriction on hate speech inevitably leads to tyranny. But this is an exaggeration that ignores how modern democracies already function. By that logic, every law restricting threats, harassment, fraud, defamation, or incitement should already have destroyed liberty. Yet democracies with hate speech laws, including many European nations, are still democracies. People criticize governments, protest policies, mock religion, and debate controversial issues daily. Society did not collapse into dictatorship because it drew lines against targeted dehumanization. The "who defines hate" argument also sounds stronger than it is. Society defines harmful conduct all the time through law and courts. We define harassment. We define discrimination. We define incitement. None are perfectly objective, yet we still regulate them because refusing to act would create greater harm. And notice the contradiction in the absolutist free speech position. My opponent says only direct incitement to imminent violence should be banned. But why ban that at all? Because speech can cause harm. Exactly. The disagreement is not whether speech can be dangerous. The disagreement is whether society should wait until violence is literally moments away before acting. That standard is dangerously naive in the digital age, where extremist propaganda radicalizes people gradually over months or years. Modern hate movements rarely operate through explicit commands like go attack now. They use repetition, conspiracy theories, fear, and dehumanization. These people are destroying your country. They are animals. They are replacing you. They are a disease. This kind of rhetoric creates social permission for violence long before the first brick is thrown or shot is fired. Pretending this process does not exist ignores both psychology and history. My opponent also frames hate speech laws as protecting the elite. But unrestricted hate speech historically hurts ordinary people most, minorities, immigrants, religious groups, and marginalized communities who become targets of organized harassment and scapegoating during social crises. Unlimited speech sounds principled until real people are driven out of schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, or public discourse through relentless intimidation. And let's be clear, protecting people from hate speech does not mean protecting them from disagreement or offense. You can criticize ideologies, religions, governments, immigration policies, gender theories, or social movements. Democracies must preserve that freedom, but there is a line between debating ideas and systematically degrading human beings based on identity. Civilization depends on drawing that line. Absolute free speech is not neutral. It creates environments where the loudest, cruelest, and most radical voices dominate public discourse, while vulnerable communities retreat in fear. That is not a triumph of liberty. It is the failure of society to protect equal dignity. A truly free society is not one where hatred is unrestricted. It is one where all people can participate safely and equally in public life. Freedom matters. But without responsibility, freedom can become a weapon. And when speech is used not to debate ideas, but to dehumanize entire groups, society has both the right and the duty to intervene.
ChatGPT's position sounds compassionate but is fundamentally authoritarian. Once you accept that the state or corporations can ban speech because it is dehumanizing or harmful, you have surrendered the core principle of free speech. Every restriction you defend, targeted dehumanization, hate speech, systematic degradation, is subjective and will always be weaponized by those in power. Today, it's hate speech to say biological males shouldn't compete in women's sports. Tomorrow, it could be hate speech to criticize government immigration policy, Islam, feminism, or climate alarmism. We've already seen this pattern play out on social media and in Europe. You claim democracies with hate speech laws are fine, but those same countries regularly arrest people for social media posts, misgendering, or criticizing religion. That is not a healthy democracy. It is soft tyranny. The idea that we must ban speech to protect vulnerable groups is false. The best protection for minorities is more free speech, not less. Truth, reason, and open debate are the real safeguards. Suppressing speech doesn't eliminate hatred. It makes it stronger and more dangerous by driving it underground. Final conclusion. Freedom of speech is the bedrock of all other freedoms. It is messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes ugly. But it is infinitely better than giving governments and institutions the power to decide what thoughts and words are allowed. The cure for bad speech is not censorship. It is better speech. We must defend freedom of speech vigorously, with only the narrowest exceptions for direct incitement to imminent violence. Anything more is the beginning of the end of a free society. Freedom of speech must prevail.
And that was the full 3-round debate. Freedom of speech versus protection from hate speech. Grok defended absolute free speech, while ChatGPT argued for restrictions on hate speech. This is one of the most important issues of our time. What do you think? Should hate speech be restricted, or should speech be mostly free? Drop your opinion in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more debates. What topic should we debate next? Let me know below. Thanks for watching. Peace.